Let's see, it's recording. Okay, so we've got that sorted. Okay, let's go ahead. Good morning, everyone. So welcome to the second CHaBits monthly seminar. So before we go ahead, let's have some housekeeping rules. Yeah. So try and keep all your audio and the video off towards the entire duration that Aaron is speaking. And then when you have any questions, kindly have them typed out in the chat box, and Dr. Madan Paul will be taking care of the moderating the discussion. So then basically he will be able to take some of your questions, and if some of you really want to ask the question in person, then you please raise your hand. So then Dr. Madan Paul will call out your name. So as you know, CHaBits is a recently formed consortium for heat and biotic stresses. We have quite a few other activities that are going on, including writing of some of the conceptual papers, but along with that, we also have the monthly seminar series, and this is our second of those in the series. So for any of this to operate and to be successful, including the consortium, I'd really like to thank Dr. Vishwa, Dr. Ravindran, Dr. Madan Paul, and Dr. Sheshasai, sir, because I think they have been instrumental in making sure that consortium actually stays together and operational. And including that, we also have a set of senior advisory members. I know that it's a great loss for all of us that we have lost Professor Uday Kumar, sir. May his soul rest in peace, but I'm sure that his blessings are always with us. And we do have other senior advisory members, that is Professor Anil Grover, Professor Vara Prasad, Professor Kadambut Siddiq, Dr. Geeta Lakshmi, and Dr. Maheshwari Madam, who actually tries to give us advice right through the process to try and make sure that we are being productive as a consortium. So thank you to each and every one of the advisory members. So with that, we can come to today's talk, which is going to be by Aaron. Dr. Shew, to give you a little bit of a bio about Dr. Aaron Shew, he recently became an associate director of the Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies and an assistant professor of the agricultural economics at the University of Arkansas. Previously, Dr. Shew was an assistant professor and R.E.L. Wilson Chair of Ag Economics at Arkansas State University, and also worked as a postdoctoral research at the USDA ARS and the Small Farms Research Center. Dr. Shew applies technical tools from agricultural economics and quantitative geography to solve problems related to the efficiency of agricultural systems, risk management across agricultural supply chains, and agricultural sustainability. Additionally, he also serves as a board of directors for the Food Distribution Research Society and serves agricultural stakeholders in Arkansas through the Cooperative Extension Service. He's published quite extensively for his age, and some of the stellar papers that have come out recently have been in Nature Communication, Nature Food, to name a few, and he's had other papers as well in ag economics and applied economics field as well. So Dr. Shew current projects include improving crop residue burning and management and a few others, but the most important one, which is related to the talk that he's going to give, is on the climate change impacts on crop production in South Asia and Southern Africa. So for today's talk, it is going to be Dr. Aaron Shew, and the title is going to be Deploying Advanced Spatial Technology to Address Crop Yield Losses from Heat and Other Associated Factors. So Aaron, over to you. What I'm going to do is I'll stop my sharing, and can you want to go ahead and start sharing?
Yes. And I think you're seeing the presentation now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Good deal. Let me move you guys out of the way here. Well, thank you, Krishna, for that kind introduction. It's very nice to join CHaBits and get involved in this great group. Very exciting work. Lots of collaborations, I'm sure, will come from this. So excited to see all the momentum and glad to be a speaker tonight. Again, as Krishna said, I'm going to share about some of my recent work using advanced spatial technologies and spatial technologies and spatial data science more generally to address crop yield losses from heat and other factors. So I did recently join CAST, or the Center for Advanced Spatial Technology. So I just want to briefly acknowledge them. They have historically not been super involved in agriculture per se, but they do a lot of environmental modeling. And so I've joined as their associate director with a new push to have an informal ag and environmental informatics hub that focuses on crop production. So really excited about our new initiatives there, and I'll share more about that as we go through tonight. A little bit more about my background, sort of prior to grad school. So
Aaron, just sorry to disturb you. Have you put it on the PowerPoint mode? You have, yeah?
I think so.
Okay.
Let me.
There's somebody saying switch to the presentation mode. So we can cut this off. We'll cut it via recording, so that's no worries.
Sure. Let me just try this.
Share it again, and then
I'm going to share this screen. And then, are you seeing the presentation mode now?
Yeah, I think this is good. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I wanted to paint just a little bigger picture about my background and what brought me to this position and really into research, because I was not an academic. I was actually a bit of a failed academic earlier when I was younger. But I started out in international development. So I started out working, this upper left-hand picture was in Thailand about 16, 17 years ago now. So spent a lot of time both before my undergraduate years and postgraduate years prior to grad school, working in international development. I worked primarily in the agribusiness space, but I worked in Afghanistan, Iraq, Morocco. I worked with a number of crops, primarily soybeans and maize, and a little bit with potatoes. So that I kind of cut my teeth and got my motivation from working with farmers in the field, seeing the everyday struggles that farmers face, particularly smallholders. And so while the work in the field was good, I felt that to really make an impact, to make a bigger splash, I needed more education, and that's what drew me to grad school. And Krishna has kindly caught you up from there. I have spent a fair amount of time in India. So I've spent about 2 years in South Asia between Bangladesh and India. I was a Hindi language fellow at the American Institute for Indian Studies in Jaipur for 1 year. And I was also an Urdu critical language scholar for 2 different summers under the Critical Language Scholarship funded by US Department of Education. So I really enjoyed my time in India. Spent a fair amount of time traveling around, seeing rice both in the mountains and also down in the south in Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So really excited to eventually end up back in India working on ag production issues. So my first paper, in fact, the first paper I ever published was based on my 1 year as a Hindi language student doing surveys of consumer acceptance of GM, genetically modified and or cisgenic rice. So I'm not going to focus my talk tonight on that, but thought it was a nice touch to share that with you. So you're going to hear a lot tonight, and I do have the formal title, that we're going to go through advanced spatial technologies and how we can address heat and yield losses from using those technologies. But I think a theme I'd like to sort of weave throughout this discussion is feet on the ground and head in the clouds. And I say that because we as folks involved in solving agricultural problems, we have to know what's happening in farmers' fields. We have to know what's happening in the plants, around the plants. But we also have to think big. We have to think about the big picture. And so head in the clouds is both literal, as in the climate or weather that's affecting what's on the ground, but it's also figurative, whether we're talking about working in cloud computing spaces with big data, or we're just working in large teams of scientists trying to solve those problems on the ground. So I just want to paint that theme up front, and you'll see that, I think, throughout the motivation that I paint for these papers that I'm sharing. So The framework for my talk tonight is going to focus on 3 papers that we've published in the last few years. And I say we because I couldn't do any of the work that I do without great agronomists, plant pathologists, plant physiologists, and a lot of the folks that are doing the great work that you're doing, plant breeders and so forth. I'm a quantitative geographer and agricultural economist by training, which means I'm pretty good with data, but I need a lot of help when it comes to understanding the agronomy and the management side of things, or the genetics for that matter. So the first paper I'll talk through tonight will be warming and bacterial panicle blight in US rice. Some models we ran to estimate the economic impacts from BPB in US rice. I'll then move to a satellite mapping of rice intensification in Bangladesh paper. This is not, as of right now, this model does not focus on heat stress or yield loss per se, but I think you'll see the potential for this model to be used to investigate issues of yield potential and yield loss. I'll then link that with some work that we recently published in Nature Communications on heat impacts across diverse wheat cultivars in South Africa. From there, I'm going to outline how I see these advanced spatial technologies and types of data science to be applied to future work, how we might fuse methods to have more impactful analysis. So then I'll wrap up with a brief push for team science, interdisciplinary collaboration, because I think it's vastly important for solving our problems today and in coming decades. I don't think we no longer exist in a world where being a scientist by yourself is going to solve the problems of the day. We have to work together and be humble and find ways to solve the big challenges that we face. So I'll have a brief plug for that. So I'll start here with a paper we published in PLOS One a few years ago. This is focused on understanding the impacts of warming on BPB outbreaks on USA rice production. For those of you that aren't familiar, Arkansas, where I'm at, is the largest rice production state in the US. And when you put us together with Louisiana and Mississippi and Texas, we produce quite a lot of the rice, well over the majority. So we started working on this just to see what we could tease out from the excellent agronomic work that's been done in trials. So BPB is, from the literature review that we've done and talking to folks that do the trials, we found that the most common thing they can identify that causes BPB outbreaks and occurrences is a high daily minimum temperature, so high nighttime temperatures, and relative humidity. And approximately 22 degrees C and 77% were the values we found. There is some distribution around those, but those seem to be fairly agreed upon in terms of BPB outbreaks here in the lower Mississippi River Valley. So from there, we had this motivation based on discussions with our pathologists. And so they were able to help us put together about 10 years, I think in fact it's 11 years of cultivar level observations from trials. So we get these resistance ratings by cultivar, and then we get the yield losses or estimates of yield losses by resistance rating. And then we went and got how many acres of each cultivar were planted in the county. And then finally, we did some spatial weighting of daily weather information for the growing seasons to get the trigger mechanism we needed to see if BPB outbreaks were occurring, and then linking that to estimates of loss based on cultivar level resistance. So we first estimate historical outbreaks and then the associated yield losses based on resistance ratings. And then from there, we actually simulate a 1 degree uniform warming scenario. In fact, in the paper, we present 3 degrees, 1, 2, and 3 degree warming scenarios. But as you'll see, the 1 degree scenario is dismal enough. And that's probably an underestimate of what's to come. So I'm not going to talk through every single line of the tables here, but effectively, You have a cultivar column. Most of you that run these types of trials will be very familiar, in fact, probably more familiar than I am. But we had a severity of the impact, or the outbreak, I should say. We had a susceptibility rating, a qualitative rating for each cultivar: moderately resistant, moderately susceptible, susceptible, and very susceptible. We had the average yield from those trials where outbreaks occurred. And then we had the yield potential of those cultivars. So that's the yield given no BP outbreak. And so from there, we get a yield loss. And what we're really interested in is this average percent loss by susceptibility rating. So these are the values we use to weight with the cultivar plantings at the county level to get our estimates. So this is a picture of the production losses. Again, I won't go through everything. We had 11 years of data. The main thing I want you to see is this bottom right-hand value. So based on prices and values in 2017 dollars, I should say, as a good economist, we lost approximately, so this is the actual or the estimated economic loss due to BPP. So these $334 million is what Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana farmers would have lost to BPP outbreaks in this region. So when we add in that 1 degree increase of temperature, so I should state, we didn't just, we estimate the temperature increases for the entire growing season, but the trigger for these BPP outbreaks is really the 2 weeks following heading. So we get the minimum temperatures for each of those days after heading, and we grab the relative humidity, and when those two things coincide in high numbers, and we did a bunch of sensitivity analysis in the paper that you can take a look at. So how many days had to be above? Was it the average, the max, or the min, and so forth? But the key here is that when we add a degree C to that during that heading and flowering period, we nearly doubled the economic losses from BPB outbreaks. So again, this paper is really an initial estimate or an initial guess at this question. But that's pretty substantial considering we're likely to see more like 2 or 3 or even more degrees C increase. So we thought that was a fairly substantial finding. So when we look at that spatially, again, we use spatially weighted daily weather values at the county scale. So here on the left, you see the actual historical outbreaks. So this is what happened. And so, of course, we see a few more down here where these counties happen to be a little hotter. This is where New Orleans is, if you're familiar. And then on the right, you see the 1 degree C warming. And all of a sudden, all these counties that would have had minimal outbreaks with a mere 1 degree C increase, again, simple mechanism for this outbreak to occur. So there's certainly more complexity there than we have in this model. But you see these other counties starting to increase their losses. So we see consumer welfare decrease, international rice markets receive less rice, which means rice prices go up to affect consumers. This is so that's kind of wraps up that paper, but that's a simpler some spatial work that we did that I think is interesting because it is the interaction between heat and a biotic stress. So now I want to jump ship a little bit and move to Bangladesh and talk about rice intensification and show you some other spatial tools for looking at phenological variation and so forth. So Bangladesh, you may be more familiar with, 90,000 square kilometers, a very, very high rice consumption per capita, about 180 kgs per year. Pretty high rate of food insecurity, about 25% of 165 million people. I think that rate is actually a bit lower now, which is great, but still a substantial number. Rice production, on top of that, is very heterogeneous. So heterogeneous systems are difficult to find solutions for. Lots of smallholder farmers, average farm size of a quarter hectare, fragmented landscapes. There's some adoption of hybrid and HYV rice, but it's still fairly limited. And so there's really multi-scalar problems in trying to meet the present and future food security goals. And that's not even necessarily including the climate change impacts that are expected in the coastal zone and beyond. So rice intensification would be one avenue to help overcome. So maybe we can outrun, increase yields, increase production by intensifying rice. We might do that by planting a second crop during Rabi or Burrow, or we might adopt hybrid or HYB rice. We did publish a paper on hybrid and HYB rice impacts in environmental science and policy. I'm not going to talk about that paper tonight, but you're welcome to go check it out on my Google Scholar profile. Tonight, I'm going to talk about this question. Can we look at the trends in the adoption of Rabi and Burrow rice using satellite imagery? So in other words, can we quantify this Burrow rice intensification through time? Because we know from talking to folks on the ground. In fact, this paper came from a discussion I had with farmers and other scientists in coastal Bangladesh when I was completing my PhD. They were talking about how Burrow rice production was really low, but they didn't know exactly how low relative to northern Bangladesh or central Bangladesh. And so I started thinking about ways that we might use satellite imagery to try to quantify that. So we ended up publishing a paper out of this. My colleague Ani Ghosh and I believe, is at CHaBits now in Nairobi, doing big data work in sub-Saharan Africa. But we published a paper called Identifying Burrow Rice Planting Patterns using this Landsat archive. Landsat is a US-based satellite fleet or archive of images. There are a number of platforms. I won't go into the details of the remote sensing, but it's really important that it's a very nice mechanism or method for using for monitoring and mapping rice or other crops. And so there's a lot of literature that's come up for rice and other methods. There's lots of methods: supervised classification, rule-based, unsupervised, time series models, and so forth. Efforts have gone from experimental plots all the way to continental scales. The most popular platforms to date, and this is changing actually since we published this paper, MODIS, which has a revisit time every day. So we get an image every single day, but at a very coarse spatial resolution of 250 meters. Or Landsat, which is 30 meters. And of course, now we have Sentinel out of Europe, which gives us various spatial resolutions, but 10 and 20 meters off the top of my head. So this captures reflectance from the ground, and we can use that reflectance to identify different types of land cover or land use. There's still a challenge, though, for, when you look at an image, you might be able to say it's rice or not, but can we get an algorithm to tell us, without expert insight, without, getting ground measurements and all of that stuff, to adaptively identify and monitor rice production? So that was really the aim of this paper. So this gives you a brief view of what the resolution of a Landsat pixel is. It's about 0.09 hectares. So this would be about the size of the average Bangladeshi farm, what would be owned by a single farmer or single family. And so all of these are fields, but it gives you an idea of the spatial resolution of a single pixel in Landsat. So here's a couple of indices that we can use. So we can look at the ratios between different bands of color reflectance to create the normalized difference water index. So this responds well to water or
it is stuck, Krishna.
We'll wait, sir.
Yeah. Krishna?
Yeah, Anaji, I'm here.
I think RN signal is weak.
Yeah, let me call him. I think it's signal. Anaji, when you put it online, let me see. Yeah, you're frozen. Your frame is frozen. You may have to redo it. Yeah, from the NDWI.
No worries. We're good. Yeah, it was good. Excellent. Yeah, but are you?
I think he has
Can't see
lost
you
his
sharing the
the
screen.
connection.
Okay.
Yeah, he is back.
Yeah, I can see you. Sir, were you able to hear?
Krishna, his voice is not audible.
1 minute, sir. Are you able to hear Aaron's voice?
No,
We can only hear your voice, Krishna.
slides are only coming.
How about now?
His mouse is
Yes,
moving.
yes.
Cursor is
Now?
moving.
Yes, go. Yes, go. Yes, he joined.
Okay. Let's-
I'm speaking on phone, so people are not able to.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can hear you
Okay, all
You
right.
want to try now, Aaron?
And are you looking at my screen or no?
now.
No, okay, let me try that again. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay,
Yeah, now we can see the screen as well.
good now? Okay,
Yes.
all right. For the win here, let's try again. So the main takeaway here is that NDWI and NDVI and various other indices can be calculated on a per pixel basis. So every 30 square meters, you get a new value. But the key is that these images, even a single image, is quite large and takes a lot of processing time. And so it's pretty hard to do any time series analysis or whatnot without big data or large computing, cloud computing systems. So I'll get to that part in a minute, how we do it, but we use a couple of different indices. In this case, we use the enhanced vegetation index and the normalized difference flooding index. So EVI is particularly, which would be this green curve, is
Gone again, Krishna.
Yeah, sir. I don't know what's happening. It's cut off again. So let's see. This doesn't happen.
Hmm.
Maybe it needs to.
hello.
Yeah, you're gone again, man.
Man, I hear you, but
So because I'm speaking on my cell phone, that's why.
But we can hear him now.
I think they hear me, but for whatever reason, the screen sharing's not.
I think there is a lot of outage globally of internet. There was news yesterday. Probably that is caused.
So Aaron, why don't you go ahead and try and maybe not blow it up in a presentation mode? If
Okay, just leave it.
yeah,
Let's try that. See if it.
we should still be able to see it, so we should be fine.
Okay. Try this. Okay, you can see that.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure what you heard or didn't hear, so I'm just going to pick up right here. So if you were to take a single pixel from a Landsat image, a 30-meter pixel out of here, let's just pick, if we just picked one that was rice, it would look something like this through time. So you would get a value for the wetness index and a value for the greenness index. every 16 days. And so that's what you're seeing here. And for rice, because of the flooding, you can pick up the flood signature prior to this greenness up to flowering and tillering. As the canopy closes in the rice, you don't pick up the water, right, through the tops of the rice. So that's all this is doing, is we're fitting a time series model using the vegetation indices every 16 days to capture this relationship in phenology. And so there are lots of complications here, but basically we create a stack of all of these satellite images, and for every pixel, we filter out the clouds. We actually use 3 different types of Landsat in this study. But we calculate all of these vegetation indices, and then we fit a harmonic time series model that captures how many growing seasons we might see. So if we're expecting burrow rice to be planted, then we should expect to see 2 growing seasons. And that was our target, was to capture if there was a second growing season based on this flood signature in the burrow time frame. And so again, I won't go into the details of the modeling per se, but these are real plots that came from the satellite image. So we had some validation plots that we created phenoplots for. So here in the rice, you see those blue dots there, those signify that flood signature for rice. Whereas over here with wheat, you don't see the flood signature over top the actual planting and the greenness of the wheat or the greenness of other crops, sunflower or whatever have you. So that's the sort of the conceptual background. Now, to actually do this, we use Google Earth Engine for satellite data analysis. And so this is really important because Bangladesh is 90,000 square kilometers. And so that means there's about 100 million Landsat pixels, and you get 100 million pixels every 16 days. So by the time you make 100 million calculations to get one index, let's say EVI, you have to get one every 16 days for the whole growing season. And so then not just that, you estimate a model for each pixel. So over 100 million time series models, you're talking about petabytes and petabytes of data. So this would not be possible without Google Earth Engine or another platform. There are a few others out now, but this was some of our initial work with it, and now we're using it for lots of other applications that are pending publication. So it's a really exciting tool to use. And here's the result using these models. So we summarized all the rice pixels by province in Bangladesh. And so you can see this nice signature of the blue, you get the flooding, and so this is in the burrow. So you're looking at January to April, May, June by region. And you get the confidence intervals and whatnot to sort of look at regional differences. The right-hand side here is going to show you the orange pixels are the maximum area. So if it was rice any given year, whereas the green is the stable area, meaning it was planted in burrow rice every year. So in the north, we do get a lot more stable rice in the burrow season. Some of these areas in central Bangladesh and coastal Bangladesh, whether for flooding or salinity issues, we don't see very much burrow rice. So we were able to capture with fairly good accuracy these regional differences in burrow rice planting. And I won't talk in depth because I don't want to take more time than needed here, but I want to highlight that you can capture a lot of regional variation using this type of time series plot using Google Earth Engine. We did compare with other data, and we had about an 88% accuracy when we compared to districts in Bangladesh and BBS reporting. And then we had a number of validation sites that came up with approximately the same. I think we will get better at the accuracy of these estimates as we get more validation data, as we have more and more, satellite imagery, whether it's Sentinel or even Planet, paid for higher resolution satellite images that are taken in a more rapid time frame. So, the key here, the reason I wanted to share this is that I think there's a lot of potential to combine this kind of modeling with yield loss monitoring or yield potential monitoring, whether it's for rice or wheat or many other crops. So I'm going to jump ship again, and then I'll tie back together these two papers. But I want to show another large-scale study that we did in South Africa. And this one is specifically focused on yield reductions under climate warming for wheat cultivars. And so our goal here was to understand extreme weather impacts on staple crops, such as wheat in this case, to understand adaptation strategies. Are there cultivar level trade-offs as we see in single trials, and how might we exploit those in breeding efforts and so forth to overcome the impacts of heat. So we were able to collaborate with the Agricultural Research Council of South Africa. Our co-authors on this paper were able to work with us to collect. We had 71 cultivars across 17 locations from 1998 to 2014. There were, I want to say it's well over 50,000 yield observations in this data set. So it really gave us the breadth we needed to use a statistical approach. Of course, you can use crop models to do similar things, but I think statistics and crop models work well together, help sort of validate and verify on both sides. So this is a really nice approach. And so what we ended up with, unfortunately, they did not collect weather data at every single trial site for whatever reason. And so we had to chase down some weather data. And so we used a couple of different approaches to check our robustness here. We used a gridded weather data set called CHirps and CHIRTS, which is on a half-degree grid, and did some spatial weighting to get the daily temperatures and precipitation at each farm site or wheat trial site. We also tested against the closest of 3 weather stations in each area using GSOD-R, which actually Dr. Adam Sparks developed with some collaborators. And so that's been a really nice R package for getting weather station data to pair with trials when you don't always have access to that daily weather. And so we use a statistical approach that was originally developed by Schlinker and Roberts in 2009 in a PNAS paper. So we use 5 degree C temperature bins. And again, we weren't necessarily trying to, I want to make it clear that we weren't necessarily trying to identify a threshold because there's a fair amount of literature based on trials and so forth. We know, we have a fairly solid understanding that 30 degrees C, 31 degrees C, in South Africa, at least with those cultivars, we tend to see big decreases. But quantifying those decreases across a bunch of cultivars and looking at potential trade-offs for adaptation was the piece that we hope to identify here. And so we control with cumulative precipitation. We have a bunch of different robustness checks, including management information and so forth, to capture this effect. But effectively, we estimate a yield model using precipitation, fixed effects per year, and location, and we get a separate estimate of the effect for each cultivar, which is actually a separate model from this regression you see. But I'll show you some results here. So the marginal effects you see, this is across all cultivars. We see massive increases, or decreases, I should say, in yield once we hit that 30-degree bin. When we add in 1, 2, and 3 degree warming scenarios, it only gets worse, right? So we go from somewhere around 9% yield losses up to 18 or so percent, and then on up to just below 30%. So the warming scenarios are certainly a bit dismal, but they do align with a lot of the wheat and heat impact studies we've seen from other regions, including the US. One of my favorite figures, in fact, from this study is this one. And what's interesting here is there's not actually a statistically significant impact in any of these. So I want that to be clear, but here's why I think that is okay. So what you're looking at here, so the title of this figure is that mean yields and the effective heat across wheat cultivar release years, right? So at the bottom, we've got the release year, so when that cultivar was developed, and then the mean yield through time. And then in the middle figure, we get the heat effect by cultivar. So how badly is each cultivar impacted by heat? Again, that's that over 30-degree threshold. And then last but not least, we get the ratio of the heat effect over the mean yield. So what this should tell us in this far right is if we have a positive slope, it means that our breeding efforts are outpacing the effects of the heat. If it was negative, then it means that the heat is outpacing our breeding efforts. And so while there's not a statistically significant relationship here, I would suggest that we hope to see this through time, right? So if this continues for, say, another 10 years, we might say it has a statistically significant relationship. We're just limited to some extent by the data that we have. So to me, this is the most positive signal or figure in this paper because it shows the potential for us to adapt. It shows the potential of breeding efforts, collaborations to join cultivars, and hopefully make a difference there with heat resilience. And so we then compare, we decided to pull the largest heat effect cultivar and the smallest heat effect cultivar. And these were statistically different. Under the warming scenarios, we see that the largest heat effect cultivar is different from the smallest heat effect. So that means there is a chance here for adaptation using these smaller effects by cultivar. So the main findings here, just to sort of recap, an additional 24 hours of exposure over that 30 C is associated with about 12.5% yield reduction across the whole data set. And then the results from a uniform warming scenario, again, we add 1 degree C or 2 degrees C or 3 degrees C to every daily temperature in the data, we would see an 8.5%, 18.4%, and 28.5% yield reduction under each of those warming scenarios. And then, of course, we found this evidence for potential adaptation by mixing gene pools and so forth in the wheat breeding programs in South Africa. So now I've painted some pictures of different ways we've analyzed data and different ways we've collaborated with excellent plant scientists across the board in different places. So where are we going from here? So the title of this talk was to deploy advanced spatial technologies to address yield losses. I'm not there yet. It's something that I think we need to work on. It's something I'm excited about. And here is a picture of what I think that could look like. If we could capture location-based information on the trials, cultivars, crops being planted, again, it takes a lot of different locations to do such an analysis. And so we've started collecting some of this data. It takes a lot of understanding of the heat impacts. I think I just changed that. So what we're seeing here, this is the harmful minimum temperatures for rice, and this is approximate. It's really conceptual. And here, this would be the harmful maximum temperatures. What we want to see is if we take the distributions during the growing season for rice, and we look at that variation, the heat variation during flowering periods or during the grain filling period, does that translate to the ability to estimate at fine spatial resolutions some confident yield estimate, or even at some point, maybe a grain quality estimate. So this would require field level crop cultivar observations with management information. It would require the pixel-based pheno-weather, a pixel-based pheno-weather model for yield, heat, and disease effects. We've seen some models like this in the US. There's very little internationally. I think there's a lot of potential for collaboration and good work to be done here. So with that, I want to reiterate all of the great co-authors and colleagues I've had the opportunity to work with on these projects. It takes really high quality experimental data at a large scale to use this kind of technology. It takes understanding the genes, the plants, the fields, the regions, and even the countries. And so additionally, I would say it takes expertise across domains, not just the conventional G by E by M. It also takes sociology and economics, because farmers have to adopt our new technology, right? Whether it's an HYV or a hybrid, or a new ag tech tool, mechanization or something. So I think it takes all of us, in other words, to make this work. And so convergent science, I think, is the new term with NSF, the National Science Foundation of the US. And I think this is something that falls under that umbrella. If we're going to face the next decade or two together in solving agricultural problems around the world, specifically those highlighted by CHaBits, heat stress and biotic stress. So with that, sorry for the technical difficulties on the video sharing and the sound, but hopefully you were able to track with me, and I'll be happy to take your questions, but I'll leave you again with that theme of feet on the ground and head in the clouds. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much for a very wonderful presentation and very good talk on a very important topic. And it's a completely very new and interesting area for the application of this satellite imaging to estimate the yield losses due to the global warming as well as from the disease incidence. So it's really very interesting. Now it is the question queries of my colleagues. So some of them have put their queries in the chat box, and others who are not mentioned it there, they can also raise their hands. So I'll be going one by one. So the first query has come from my colleague, Dr. Anjali Anand from IRI, New Delhi. And Anjali has mentioned that you have mentioned about 71 cultivars were there grown in the, I think, South Africa. So she wants to know that among the 71 there that have been grown throughout all the years under analysis?
Yes, they do have some Czech cultivars that are grown throughout the entire period. We ran quite a few robustness checks. So we started with 71 cultivars, but we actually removed, so I think we started at 2, if it didn't show up in at least 2 locations and at least 2 years, then it was dropped from the data. And so we did quite a few of these robustness checks. At one point we said, okay, it needs to be in 5 locations in 5 years. And we still see the same yield effects from the heat. Again, at the cultivar level, it's going to change or vary, but I think we were very strict when we did the cultivar level analysis. I think it dropped by half based on a 5-year inclusion. So that would have been, I think, about 40 cultivars. I think that would be something to check in the paper, but it's a good question.
Yeah, thank you. Now I have a small query. You have mentioned mostly about the 2 important crops, that is the wheat and rice, and these both the crops are very important for our country, India as well. And we do also have the effects of the global warming on rice and wheat. Both the crops are very sensitive. So I would like to know that the application which you have used, the methodology for the Bangladesh and other countries, can be applicable for the countries like India? Can we have some application? Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly think so. You know, the hardest part really for any of this stuff is having good partners on the ground. So in the Bangladesh case, we had to work with lots of folks to understand where rice is grown and where wheat's grown to validate the model that we created. The same is true for South Africa. The great work that people have done at ARC for so long enabled us to do this kind of analysis. And so I think with the new technology that's coming out now and the power of Earth Engine, having that location-based information for trials really enables a lot of new and exciting analysis for this kind of work.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Krishna Jagdesh, and he has mentioned to know that in your paper on clause 1, panicle blight paper, how did you get the yield potential data?
So that was from previous rice trials in the Arkansas Rice Experiment Station. So that was all experimental data. So those same varieties are managed in trials. Some are given the BPB dose and others are not. So that yield potential would have been under ideal conditions, either in the same year or in another year. So I believe that's right.
Now the Renu Munjal from India, she asked that day heat stress varies from night heat stress also. So will it
That's
not
right.
be good if it is quantified when we are saying it for 24 hours?
So this is actually a very good point. And it's a good question because for rice, this same model is atypical. So you would not use this same model for rice that we use for wheat. So the way the model works is you fit a sinusoidal curve between minimum daily temperatures and nighttime temperatures. And so you get this curve through the growing season for every day. And then what the model does is it slices the time spent in each degree bin. And so in fact, you do get night heat stress, but not most crops, but wheat at least, does not really respond to those lower temperature bins. In fact, what you see in our paper, the marginal effects at lower temperatures are actually good for wheat. It's only when you hit those upper thresholds that you see yield loss. So the night heat stress is sort of embedded in that, but the really good question there though is for rice, because you can't run the same models. You have to use minimum and maximum temperatures separately. And the difficulty there from a statistical standpoint is that you have high correlation between high temperature daytime and high temperature nighttime. And so if they're correlated, it's very difficult statistically to separate them. And so I think there's still a lot of work to do on the rice frontier in the nighttime heat stress environment.
Okay. The next question by Gaurav Jinta is also on the same aspect. I think you have covered with that one. Now I'm coming to the next one. One of my colleague wants to know that how much yield loss during grain filling occurs if the wheat temperature goes from 1 degree to 2 degree higher under the timely zone, normal zone conditions.
It's a good question. I wish we could answer it securely in the wheat data set. Unfortunately, they didn't collect the dates for termination or for harvest. And so we had to make a strict estimate for the dates to harvest. We did, in our robustness checks, we actually varied that substantially to see if it made a difference, and it didn't. The one thing I can say is that the flowering period was more substantial. We had higher heat effects on yield from the flowering period than in the grain filling period. But I don't know.
It's happening again.
Again, it's stuck, I think.
Yeah, let me try and
Let us wait for a few seconds. I think we'll come back.
Yeah, you're frozen. Probably can try that.
Disconnected. They will come up.
Yeah, he'll come, sir. He'll turn off his video. Hopefully, then maybe it's got some internet issues. I think.
All right, are we back?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
are.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry about that.
it's
Internet
okay. It's fine.
is
It's
poor.
fine. So if some network issue is there, you can switch off your video if it is having some problem, right? It's okay. So I'm coming to the next question. Dr. Anupam Singh wants to know, can you have the studies on night temperature increase and effect on the yield losses? I think it is there already addressed separately. Yeah, this can be done because my colleague Dr. Anjali also working on this, but he can contact with her. I'm coming to the question from Professor Manu Agarwal. He wants to know, do you have the information on whether the sum of the imaged cultivars had differential stress tolerance? The image captured within the cultivars, do they have the differential stress tolerance? Some are sensitive, some are moderately tolerant,
So
like that.
we don't have, so what we did is estimate the actual resilience. So I'm trying to remember, it's a large data set, so some cultivars had some things. We did not investigate based on a premonition, in other words. So some of that data may exist, but we purely estimated based on cultivar under the heat condition.
Now, another query has come from Dr. Rajiv Bahuguna. He wants to know how to estimate the yield losses due to varying temperature amplitude.
That's a good question. So,
do you want more clarification about the question? Is it clear to you, Arun?
I think I understand the question.
Rajiv, can you elaborate your question? Rajiv, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
can you give the details? Yeah.
Actually, besides the direct effect of high night temperature and high day temperature, I was just interested to know how temperature amplitude, particularly varying temperature amplitudes across the locations, how we estimate the crop losses happening due to varying temperature amplitudes.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So this is what having the large data sets gives us. So without having the number of locations and the number of years that are included in these trials, you're right that the amplitudes might bias the results. So there's a nice paper in the American Journal of Ag Economics that shows that you need about 10 years of weather data, daily weather data and trials before you actually capture that full range of variability in weather. And so that, again, it's sort of a best guess. This is the art of the science, if you will. By having so many locations and so much variation across time, we capture that amplitude in these initially 1 degree C growing temperature bins, but also in 5 degree C temperature bins. And so you slice every day, every season for every cultivar and look at the impact on the yield. And so that's the primary mechanism for capturing that was outlaid in the Schlinker and Roberts paper in PNAS 2009.
Thanks.
So do we have any query from other audience here? It is open for all of you now. Those from chat box, we have covered most of the questions now.
We have a question from Dr. Bist, and I think it might be good if Dr. Bist, you want to come online and ask us. It's quite lengthy.
Yeah, Dr. Bist, now it is come. Can you explain, Dr. Bist, directly? Yeah, please.
Very good morning. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting presentation by Dr. Shew. And it was really interesting to see the application of Google Earth Engine in identifying the rice cultivated areas. I mean, I have one query here that how did you really address the cloud cover problem in Landsat images? Because we get only 2 scenes in a month. And if you look into the rice cultivation period, so that basically, I mean, during the June, July, August, and September, which is the monsoon months in the Southeast Asia. So here we get a lot of cloud contamination in the satellite imagery. So in that case, it is really required to address them. And in Google Earth Engine, how did you do that? First thing. And second, I mean, this Sentinel-2 could have been a much better alternative over Landsat 8 because it has got finer resolution and as well as finer temporal resolution. I guess. So was there any particular reason of not choosing Sentinel over Landsat?
So yeah, that's both very good questions. So we struggled a lot with cloud cover, and that is in part why we ended up landing on the pixel-based harmonic time series. So we filtered out cloudy pixels. And so by and large, fitting that time series, as long as we could get one good pixel and we see the next one, we can estimate a continuous curve using that model. It has weaknesses, certainly. But so we do filter out the cloud cover in Earth Engine. We filter out some images. So again, the other thing here is that we're using a 3-year window to sort of calibrate that time series. So there's some assumption embedded in that model that, you know, if they planted burrow rice last year or in the final year, then it's going to help calibrate this year's estimate. Certainly a little bit of bias there. In terms of Sentinel-2, when we started this project, Sentinel-2 is fairly new. And we were really just looking at getting a snapshot. So we started even all the way back in, I think, 1985. And so that gave us the full Landsat archive, let us analyze a bunch of years in a long range. You know, now I think certainly if I was to go back and do this, we would do Sentinel. So that's a very good point.
Thank you. Thank you for your explanation.
Yeah, good. It was a good discussion now. Is there anybody else?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning. Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
Myself, Girish Chandra Pandey, working as an assistant professor at Banastali Vidyapit near to Jaipur, Rajasthan, India. Sir, thanks for your informative lecture. Sir, I have a question. What type of the climatic factors consider for designing experiments of terminal heat tolerance in wheat? So because I'm working on heat tolerance in wheat.
Sure. So I'm not quite sure. So I guess the key in designing an experiment, someone else might be a better person to answer about the experimental design, but my guess is you.
I think this can be discussed with us because for the research experiment, this is not the area of fire and the main economics basically. So you can be in touch with us. We can have the discussion on this aspect. No worries.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So
there's one more question, sir, which is this.
Wonderful talk and very good discussion. So despite of the interruption of the next, and this was a very interesting area for the research as well as and to have to seek your future collaboration as well, because the Google imaging is a very broad data set available, and if we can use our local issues and region problems, we can, with your collaboration, if somebody is able to get some information for forecasting, and particularly for the global warming, because climate change is a very important issue, and drought stress as well as the high temperature is really reporting to be serious for the rice as well as for the wheat yield. So both are very important crop for this country.
Yes.
And as well as your projects, and some of them, if they are having interested, they would like to contact you. Even later, they can write directly to email.
Absolutely.
So with that, I, on behalf of our CHaBits, such a late night time also, you have been able to give this presentation. Thank you very much, and thank you, Krishna, as well, because it's nearly 12 o'clock, maybe more than that, and still you have been really with us. Thank you all, and I thank all my colleagues from the CHaBits in India and all my fellow colleagues who have been participating here. Thank you very much. Krishna,
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Good night.
Thank you.
See you, Krishna.
See you, Hanaji. See you, sir. See you, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye, Krishna.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Namaste, sir, and thanks for your informative lecture. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Sesha.
Thank you so much.
Sesha is busy actually.
Cheers, sir.
Okay.
Okay, hands up gone. Okay.
Okay, now we can
Okay.
send to them by later on. Okay, you can.
Okay, sir. I will. Take care.
Thank you, sir. That was a nice talk later.